Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Small Business Development Committee. I see that we have a quorum. We'll begin. And Representative Hill, if you would begin our meeting with a prayer 16.
Let us pray. Our dear, kind, and gracious Heavenly Father, as we come to you, thanking you for another beautiful day that you've given us here. We just ask for your leadership, your guidance. And Father, we pray that you would guide us in every decision that we make. We pray for our country, our state, and all of our counties. We ask thy blessing upon this meeting. In Jesus' name we pray and ask. Amen.
Thank you, Representative Hill. Thank you very much. Okay, we are rearranging our schedule. Everyone has mentioned that they will be available for the meeting, but we're going to have to change some things around, and we're going to begin with Karen Mathiak. If she would, you can come to the podium or whatever you want to do and tell us about being in business for yourself and some of the challenges you face, and especially the issues with the COVID. Before we start, I'm not going to take any questions from our audience via Zoom or here, because all of our presenters are members of the Georgia House of Representatives. If you have a question, just go see them in the chamber in the hall, and that way we've got enough time for everybody to speak because we got a full agenda. So with that, Representative Mathiak, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a good opportunity because as I see who you've invited, it's really a mixture of who we are as business people. And as I thought about what I wanted to tell you today is, for me, my business is very small. I have a family practice in a semi-rural area. So for me to have staff, proper staff, and I'm kind of old school, so for me to have somebody that has been with me over 10 years is very common. The woman that works for me now has been with me 11 years. Previous to that, the woman that was with me, my secretary, was with me 8 years. She retired. So you can see in a small business like that, the loyalty that you need, because they know our people in our community. They know our patients. They know businesses in the area that we try to support and try to push forward so that they're successful also. As far as COVID goes, I was an essential personnel, so we didn't really shut down. We changed a lot of our procedure as far as sanitizing. I used colloidal silver on everything. I think I went through gallons of that stuff. My elder patients were a little fearful of getting out anywhere. So that was kind of a stop for us. But for the most part, we made it through that fairly well. The other thing that within my community, in the healthcare community, we will have issues sometimes with insurance companies, and that goes from hospitals down to somebody as small as I am. That's very intricate, and you have to have good personnel that understand insurance companies, understand how to file, how to pre-certify. There's just a lot of logistics with that. So that's kind of where I am in a small business in a small town. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, tell us about some of the challenges, either regulatory challenges, tax challenges. You said labor. Was it difficult to find the people when the first person after 8 years retired? Tell us about some of those issues.
Tax issues, that's just small business. Everybody in here will be able to say just about the same thing. for me, it was making sure that I had a CPA that was very communicative, very able to communicate with me and to help me through some of those issues. And I've been very blessed to have I'm on my second CPA now. I'm getting older, so everybody's retiring on me. So I'm on my second CPA now. And she keeps me just as squared up as my previous CPA. What was the other thing? Taxes. What was it? Oh, regulations. I was chairman of the examining board for the state of Georgia for about 13 years. So I'm very familiar with that. And I think the Secretary of State's office has done a jam up job with our assistant attorney generals that keep us within our parameters month to month. When we do have complaints, our continuing ed provides for an hour of Georgia law, which our docs have to be familiar with. And I think that's across the board with anybody with a license. They should understand what OCGA law is and what their policies are for their specific profession or licensing.
Well, Karen, thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Being here. And we're changing the schedule a little bit. And John, Chairman Corbett. Number 13. Number 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Glad to be here this morning, talk a little bit about farming and some of the challenges that we face. The area I represent, there are a lot of fruit and vegetable farmers down there, as well as row crop. Chairman Meeks can probably speak to the row crop better than I can. But as far as the state, we've done a great job when it comes to our number one industry in Georgia, and that's agriculture. We've had some, great leadership from the two governors I've had the pleasure to work for, Governors Deal and Kemp, Lieutenant Governor Speaker Ralston, to chairs of ag committees, since I've been here, Chairman McCall and Chairman Wilkerson, great leaders. And we've got great leaders now with Chairman Dickey and Chairman Walker over ag committees. So we've, under their leadership, we've promoted some good policies to help keep Georgia, healthy here in Georgia. One example, here a couple years ago when the Hurricane Michael came through, we called a special session, was able to get help relief to the farmers in short order. And they waited up to, Steve, 2 years before we seen anything from the federal side. So the state, can react in a hurry. So we've done really well. Unfortunately, a lot of the challenge, or most of the challenges that the fruit and vegetable people face in my area deals with federal rules and regulations, labor issues, Department of Labor. They pretty well have to have H-2A workers, which is foreign workers come in. It's a guest worker program, and it works really, really great. They can, they pay for the transportation here, house them while they're here. They got to guarantee them, 30 hours a week, and then when the crop is finished, and they pay for them to return back home, which it's a great program. But on top of that, the Department of Labor, they've got a formula to calculate how much they have to pay them per hour. And right now, Steve, it's about $12 per hour. It's what that rate is. They're forcing them to pay for their labor. That same labor in Mexico to pick the fruit and vegetables in Mexico is $1 per hour. So what we're basically doing, we're putting a tariff on American grown produce by forcing them to pay over minimum wage. We need to do something, and we've had conversations. Give them some credit for the housing, the transportation, that kind of stuff they're doing. They're willing to pay the minimum wage for these workers here, but by forcing them to pay over minimum wage, it's putting a tariff on our American grown produce here. So I had a farmer talk to me here a few years ago. And it said basically, domestic labor is not going to do this work. And your fruit and vegetables produce that you get at the grocery store, it will be picked by foreign hands. It just matters. It's going to depend if they keep going up on this hourly rate. It's going to be picked in a foreign country, not here. It's force them out of business with this. Some of these rules and regs they're putting on them. Another issue that they have, and some of the environmental stuff that they're doing here, they're not doing in foreign countries. There's Tier 4 engines on these, it's something just like their pumps on where they frost proof their blueberries. These things, like this year, I don't think they've had to run them at all. We haven't had to a late freeze where they don't have to run them, but they still have to have these Tier 4 engines, and it costs those engines are probably 50% more than just the typical engine would be, which they can use in other countries. Same way with the tractors. We had to pay 50% more for all this other stuff they having to put on the engines, on these diesel engines on these tractors. So it's just a lot of unfair. What our farmers have to do versus what they have to do in some other countries, and they need some help on that. And like I said, that's going to be a federal issue. But what can we do? As a state, in the Department of Ag, Gary Black, they've done a pretty good job of this, promoting Georgia grown. And I tell everybody, when you go to the grocery store, pick up that that tray of blueberries and turn it over and look at it. See where it was was it picked in, was it Georgia grown? It was not Georgia grown. Was it grown here in California, United States, or is it packaged in the United States? It's coming from a foreign country. It might be 25 cents more for one that's produced here in Cogdale, Georgia, versus one that's in some other country. Promote Georgia grown. Pay a little bit more to help the Georgia farmers. I think we can do a better job promoting what's grown here. So that's a lot of the challenge we have is federal. So we need to all the help we can on that. And Stephen can talk a little bit more to some other challenges that he could with the farm. Like I say, he's directly involved in a lot of row crop farming as well.
Thank you, John. Could you tell us a little bit about any of the challenges that you faced during the COVID? I know that you were an essential business and remained open and active, but any precautions or any issues that you had with the people that work with you and so forth?
Well, these same farmers I'm talking about, they had issues when you come out with the social distancing, when they have to transport the workers from the camps to the fields. If you got to be 6 foot apart, you put 15 people on a 70 passenger bus, and it's physically impossible. And they was able to work around those issues. Like I say, the state with some of the guidelines was able to they were able to work around that, but it was a challenge. It was definitely a challenge. Had to go in and make sure everything they fog and sanitize the camps and the buses and everything between trips and things like that. But it was definitely a challenge, but they worked through it and seemed to be we're coming out the other side of this in good shape, hopefully.
What about markets? What are we opening up the markets? Do we have the markets for the products that y'all are producing?
Well, that's seasonal. It's some years on the fruit and vegetables you have good markets, and last year was a good year. You've seen short supplies in the store, so they with all said and done, they had a good year last year. But this year, Sam Watson, Chairman Watson, he's already had to plow up some fields of cabbage because it's so cheap. So it's supply and demand like any other commodity, but we have some unfair, I think, trade practices where these other countries are able to, like I say, do with cheap labor and don't have near the safety measures that we place on our farmers, and they can dump that on in our markets and depress our prices.
Gotcha.
So
great. Well, John, thank you very much. I appreciate an update and you talking about the challenges that you face in the industry. Let's see, Bill, would you like to say? Bill Werkheiser was in the printing business, and he's going to tell us about the challenges that he faced in the printing business. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I came to listen to the other speakers. It's been interesting. I'll tell you how fast life can change. In the early 2000s, I was rocking and rolling in the printing business, had 14 employees. we were actually the second largest mailer, direct mailer in between Macon and Jacksonville because of our real estate direct mail program. We blanketed Savannah and Hilton Head. In fact, practically everybody in Hilton Head is in the real estate business. We had one customer who had 300 agents, and we had a postcard program that was just killing it. And so then we bought another, or really established another mailing company to service first-class customers, all the colleges and hospitals, all the big players. Was rocking along, and then got hit in the gut 4 times. The first one was the big recession that affected everybody in here. Wasn't much we could do about that, but it decimated the real estate business. So that took us down a notch. And as we were riding that out, got hit in the gut the second time with online printing. And the funny thing about that is I remember telling my brother years ago when the internet was fairly new, I said, well, I'm glad I'm in the custom manufacturing business. That's something you certainly can't do over the internet. Found out how wrong that was when Vistaprint started offering business cards for $10 for 1,000 cards, and I was charging $60, $70. So that was the second punch. The third one was the cost of equipment. When we were transitioning from printing presses to digital equipment, my first digital press cost about $165,000. I didn't realize that was a blessing because when I saw the price of equipment come down 4 years later, and my customers could buy pretty close to the same equipment, maybe minus some of the bindery options that they didn't need. They could buy every church, funeral home, and business in America bought their own color copier for $15,000 or $20,000. So that took away. I mean, use everything. If a customer was spending $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 with you a year, it would be ludicrous for them not to buy a piece of equipment. So that was strike 3. And then strike 4 was, oddly enough, the creation of a PDF. As I said, we were very heavily invested in the direct mail business. And so we were doing newsletters for every kind of nonprofit organization all over Southeast Georgia, and cost about $1 a piece to design, print, bind, do mailing and postage to a piece of mail. So you could create that piece yourself now with software that most 8th graders can run. And so you can send an email for free, or you can pay me $1 a piece. That wasn't a very hard decision for most people. Even though their effective rates on fundraising may not have been as well, it's still a tough decision. So you put those 4 things together, we went from 14 employees down to 2 or 3 in a 3 or 4 year period. Fortunately, before all that, when I was rocking and rolling, I started buying real estate. So had I not done that, I'd probably be asking one of y'all for a job. But I sold what was remaining in 2016, one of the greatest days of my life. And which is crazy because I really loved what I did. I'd owned the company for 34 years. And like I said, grew it from a one-man operation to being one of the biggest players in Southeast Georgia. That we did something that no one below Macon had done. We bought a $400,000 machine and started processing first-class mail for the post office, basically doing their work for them. Post office would charge us, would give us 5 cents a piece for every mail we processed. So we did all the stuff that their equipment did. And so we went around to hospitals, colleges, big players, and collected their mail for them on a daily basis, and allowed them to meter their mail at 10 cents below the current rate. So they saved 5 cents. We made 5 cents, and there was no invoicing, no nothing, no paperwork. We just picked up their mail. And then, like I said, that I had a lot more free time now, because when I was elected, they forgot to tell me this was a full-time job. So the selling the business coincided pretty well. And the guy that bought my business basically did the same thing I did. I'd over the years, I'd bought 8 other companies, and I would service their top, develop relationship with the top 20, 25% of their customers, and then close the physical location and service them out of Glenville. So that was also part of our growth. And the guy that bought me out basically did the same thing, kept the location open for about 6 months. So the printing industry has really suffered. So fortunately, I didn't have to deal with COVID. I didn't need a fifth factor. So that's my story.
I appreciate you sharing that. And it's interesting. What do you see in the future for smaller companies like printing companies and others with the development of the new technologies? Do you see that is helping or hurting rural communities? Do you see that as offering opportunities for employment? Do you see, what do you, if you were able to kind of use your experience and make a prediction, what do you see coming down the pike now?
Yeah, I'd say a small local print shop is a thing of the past. There obviously are printing players. But even the big guys, the magazine printers, all that's digital now. And you've seen what's happened to the newspaper industry. They've been decimated. I think anything ink on paper is in trouble. There'll always be some. You'll always, we were a pretty significant player in the political world during political season. I loved political years. So there'll always be direct mail, but it will not be. But as you see, people are spending money on digital ads, and so I just think you just need to transition to something else. We got into the sign business, and would get into other areas. And like I said, we bought a first-class mail processing business. But I think the small print shop that most of our communities have, almost every community has one, has just really suffered to the point of, and about 70% of them don't sell. They just go away. So I was fortunate to be able to sell. We still had a nice customer base, but I think the future of that industry is sad because it's funny. It's why I went to Georgia Southern. It was the only thing I wanted to do since I was 15 years old, and I picked Georgia Southern because it and Clemson were the only 2 schools in the Southeast to have a degree in printing management. And I was paying my own way, and Clemson was out of state tuition. So I knew where I was going very early on, and became an Eagle because of that. So just love the printing world.
Well, that's great. That's great. Bill, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a very good story, and something that people don't realize that, when you get in business, some years are good, some years are bad, and then some years are devastating. So, and I think John shared the same thing with us when he was talking about Hurricane Michael. Let's see, who else have we got? So we're waiting for several others that are supposed to appear. So we're going to take a little break for a minute. Let's get on the phone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what I'm going to say is probably a little bit unpopular. But I have listened carefully within my district. I have tried to listen carefully up here in this legislature about the challenges of labor. And if you'll go all the way back to the Great Depression, when people were lined up, hundreds and hundreds of people lined up for a chance at a job. No government programs to speak of. And those were terrible times. But what do we call that group of people now? The greatest generation. There are more people lined up waiting on a stimulus check and an unemployment check today than there are in employment lines. And if this small business committee is serious about trying to encourage entrepreneurs and small business owners, the greatest motivation for a lot of people is, well, what do I do now? You know, my mom, I've only seen her cry probably 3 times in my life. Once is when I was having some trouble of my own in school, and she was broken about that. Once was when my grandfather passed away, and the other one was when she lost a job. She was crushed. By the next day, she had a job. And how do we try to get to this fine line of separating the truly needy and the people that need government support and help to live and sustain, and those that just won't? You take what we intend for the needy away from those that just purely want something for nothing, I'll show you how to fix the labor problem. And many of those people that go into the labor force will own that small business in about 5 or 10 years, or either grow from that some other business idea because they get tired of spraying bugs for me. But we never have that conversation up here, not in a deep, meaningful way. What are we scared of? Where does that fear come from? Politics. That's why we're called politicians. We fight the political battles. We look people in the eye and say, do you need this or do you want it? What's government's responsibility? And so that's just kind of a challenge to the members. I'll show you how to fix the labor force. If you can somehow reward those that want to work and are working hard, and make sure that we still provide what people truly need in those times with, you know, that they can't help themselves. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good. Thank you. She's online. She won't put her on there. Ms. Schofield, you're online.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, good morning, everyone. I just want to caution our personal bias to influence some of the statements that we've made. There are stories behind everything. And I think if we start by raising minimum wages, we'll start to see that there'll be more changes. So let's not put our personal bias, because I can speak on the other side as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, good. James, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. Please tell us about the challenges you face in your business, opportunities, and any additional things that the state can do to help you and help other optometrists, and any of the challenges you had with COVID. So the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We had a caucus meeting this morning, and so I appreciate you, Mr. Chair, for giving me a chance to talk a little bit about the small business. As many of you know, I'm an optometrist by day. I've been practicing for, a little too long, Dominic, 22, 23 years now, and maybe even more than that. I have a couple small practices, one that services kids called Goggles Eye Care for Kids, and the other one is Midtown Vision Center. Recently, I've sort of delved into the affordable housing development business, and currently we're building, I think we have 31 units that are going to go up this year, and probably another 88 units of senior housing that we're building as well in Macon, Georgia. And so I have a couple of different hats that I wear in my local community. Obviously, COVID has been tough. Most of the capital that we had lined up to do some of this development sort of froze because people weren't sure how long we're going to be in a pandemic. And then more importantly, how do you pay this money back when people are afraid? I have several rental properties that have, people stop paying rent because they don't have any place to work. They're no fault of their own. And so part of the issue, so I can wear from a scientist hat or a businessman hat or just a construction hat. One of the things that we did last year that I thought was pretty successful, and it was sort of fortuitous, we had a program for young men in the community to go through technical college to learn plumbing, HVAC, general contracting. And they did that, and it was just on the beginning of COVID. And so they finished about 26 guys we had go through this program. When they got done, because liquidity in the market had stopped and people weren't sure how to get back, we had to just let all these guys go. And so they came out ready to work, and then all of a sudden liquidity stops in the marketplace, and then they don't have an opportunity to actually move forward. And so we're pulling them back in now, but it was rough for about 6 months. One of the things, and then from an eye doctor standpoint, nobody goes to an eye doctor when they're afraid. I mean, you may go to an emergency room, but you'll stretch those contact lenses another couple of weeks. So you'll say, oh, these glasses still work. I'm not really sure what to do. So our revenue in our optometry practice probably fell off. I think we made about a third. The revenue was about a third of what it was the year before. And so we had to let folk go. And so it's been a struggle, obviously. One of the things that happened with the PPE last year was that they gave a certain amount of money that was forgivable. And that was great. I mean, we probably got $50,000-$60,000, whatever it was. But then we had to borrow a ton of money to just kind of keep stuff moving along. And there was no direct, so we had that, but there was no help from the state at all. And in these instances, there's probably an opportunity for small businesses to say, okay, well, if we gave this much in a forgivable grant from the feds, then small businesses, like truly small businesses, folk that, 50 people less or something like that, I call them micro businesses, probably should have the same type of opportunity here in the state. Like, well, we may not give you the same matching dollar 1-for-1 that the feds give you, but we should be able to take some of that money and say, hey, here's what you can get if you have a small business that has an ongoing concern for these particular industries. And I think that would be helpful. Certainly from a programmatic standpoint, if you're helping folk to get on board and creating workforce, I think there should be some offset there as well. Because when you take on we took on the responsibility of, $25,000 to get these guys through this program, that's just a sunk cost because some of those guys now have found someplace else to go. And some of them are just waiting for us to come along. But I think if you're involved in workforce development, the state should probably think about that in a very real way. How do you do that? And how do you rightly align priorities? I think, Dominic and I caught the tail end of what he was saying, and I don't want to pull him out too much, but we used to get in these rough fights over there in that corner when I used to sit over there about just what I'm sure he was talking about is, these guys got to work and this, that, and the other. I'm like, look, if you pay somebody a living wage, it changes their lives. I've done it and we're doing it. But the reality is it costs a small business guy like myself a tremendous amount of money to do that and then hope that these guys will stay on and they won't find a better gig. So two things, Mr. Chairman, that I think could happen is one is that there could be some matching opportunity for funding that the state would give small businesses that would match the federal opportunities through a forgivable loan or low interest, 1% over prime or something like that. And then secondly, if you're involved in workforce development, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to incentivize small businesses to say, listen, if you want to retool your workforce, if you want to give them an opportunity to move forward, we're here to help. And I think those two things will go a long, long way in getting us back to some type of normalcy around the state.
Do you see your business and the market improving now as the COVID is restrictions are being lifted and I'm just going to share this. This is a personal note. The traffic in Atlanta is a lot worse than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I'm just assuming that's people moving and doing. Has your practice improved? Has the ability for the low-income housing, is that the affordable housing, is that changed? Tell us what you see going on now.
Yeah, so part of it is there's been an exodus. So we lost. So if you're a professional, right? So if you have a professional degree, you're doing some white collar professional work, like, whatever. And so that's going to stay where it is. I mean, those folk probably didn't suffer much. But it's that middle management, that gap worker that doesn't necessarily have a college degree, didn't necessarily go to technical college, that, the front office manager, those folk, they're gone. And because they had to find other opportunities. And so there's a whole slice of folk that now that, we had to pull back, they're gone. And so even though people now are like, hey, listen, I'm going to come get my eyes checked or whatever, we have a section of we had 11 workers, I think 9 to 11 workers at any time in my optical practice. about 4 of them are gone. And they found other opportunities. And so that creates some challenges. And so you have folk who had some skills that we've trained over the years who are just gone and have found other opportunities. And so even though the demand is starting to pick up just a bit, we can't service the demand. And that's not a good thing. You know that. I mean, you want to make sure that supply and demand matches on some level. We just can't. And so we're still in the scale back phase. As far as the housing is concerned, we were lucky enough to land a sort of lock in prices on some of the cost. And so as the price of lumber goes up, we sort of locked in stuff over the course of last year. So our workforce is not as well as we want, but it's kind of moving along and people are starting to call, hey, we want to buy this house and da-da-da. So that's interesting, but we'll see, man. I don't have any silver bullet, but I couldn't tell you. I think our revenues are probably about where they were in June of last year, just because we can't service the demand because we don't have the workforce that we had even 6-8 months ago. And so we'll see how this plays itself out. But I can't wait to get this capital in my rear view next week so I can get back home. So anyway.
Those sentiments are shared by everyone. That's so true. Yeah. Well, James, thank you very much for sharing your experience. We greatly appreciate it. And we're all small business people, and we have our ups and downs, and it's always been a challenge. And who's number 6? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Werkheiser had shared a similar story that I think optometrists are dealing with now, with people are actually buying glasses online.
Yeah.
And I forget the commercial that you see on TV, and so to Leader Dr. Beverly, I would ask kind of that same thing, because I think that is something that this committee could look at, some of the challenges for somebody like you that's competing with. And we've even looked at legislation that would try to figure out how to somebody do an eye exam with a phone. I'm like, surely not. But could you just touch on that? You have to compete with that now too. With
yeah, it is. So Warby. I mean, you have a bunch of places out there now selling glasses, and so part of I think we had a bill the other day, a couple of weeks back, with 1-800 contact lenses, who said you can do eye exams on a phone. You can't do that. I mean, it's just that's impossible to do. And although these places have 31 other states who can do it, I guarantee you there's not one optometrist in the General Assembly in those 31 states, because if it was, they would have killed those bills. There's no way that could happen. But the real unique challenge is your marketplace from a global standpoint used to be, look, I compete against lens crafters and, 4eyes and all these 11 different opticals within 2 miles of my space. Now I'm not competing against them. I'm competing against the world, right, globally. And so what we're selling glasses at, because we have to take care of brick and mortar and everything else that comes along with the marginal cost associated with selling a pair of glasses, they're going straight to the customer and selling them for what we're buying glasses for. And so that becomes very difficult. And so you got to find incentives to keep people locked in. And so we started a 2-part pricing strategy. If you sort of like Sam's Club, here's a gift card. If you use this, and we'll take a certain amount off, but that way we collect some of the revenue on the front end to offset some of the losses we'll have just by selling one pair of glasses to compete with the marketplace. That has been interesting. But again, you find new ways to adapt to this ever-changing environment. But we are starting to do a lot of our intake virtually, which has been interesting, which has been great because we cut down the amount of time. The problem is the demand is up while we have a supply of people that's down. And so those challenges are going to be there, and they're tough. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. And there's nothing we can do. I mean, free markets are good as long as you're winning, right? I have a problem with it when I'm losing. And so I don't know how we level the playing field in that space. But yeah, there are certainly challenges. But when it comes to eye exams and really the services that doctors provide, that should never be online. That should be something that you have to see before you can get what you need to move forward.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And Representative.
I was going to piggyback on what you said, because a lot of times it is the big box stores that we're competing with as a small business. And yes, you are so right when it comes to specialization. In my practice, we do supplementation. And if you can get that supplement offline for 50 cents cheaper than what I can provide, it's a hard pill to swallow when you know your patients are cutting you out for something, a small amount like that.
That's right. That's right.
Super, super. Oops. Chairman Beverly, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and what you've seen. We all have stories to tell, and we all recognize the challenges that it is in the small business community. And so thank you. And our next presenter is none other than Barry Fleming. Barry, thank you. James, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to be with you here today. As I understand it, y'all are talking to all kind of different small businesses about the challenges of the pandemic and just challenges in general. And the chairman asked me to talk a little bit about that, and I told him I'd be happy to do that. A law firm such as mine or any others is a business. I mean, we have employees and we have clients that we have to serve, and we have HR problems, and the list of challenges that face them are sometimes different, but also sometimes very similar. When I started thinking about the challenges of being an attorney in a law firm, the first biggest challenge I have is being a member of the legislature. The old story I heard when I first came here is that serving on the House Judiciary Committee is a great way to ruin a good law practice. Because they meet so long and they talk so long. Sometimes we have to remind our members they're not being paid by the hour during the Judiciary Committee meetings. But nonetheless, serving in the legislature is a challenge, but that's not the challenge that most of our citizens face. During the pandemic, to start with that topic, law firms faced many of the same challenges as other businesses or anybody that employed somebody. We were law firms, according to the governor's executive orders, considered essential. So we were able to keep our doors open even during the most difficult times of the pandemic. And the idea being that if the criminal justice system does not somehow figure out how to move on, if the civil justice system does not figure out how to move on, then we would really create bigger problems than we already had. You have to have folks in jail have some ability to have their case heard. You have to have people, unfortunately, going through a divorce, have some ability to deal with their issues because it affects the rest of their family. You have to have the businessman whose contract didn't get fulfilled as it was supposed to, some redress. You know, unfortunately, it still happens, that being violence. But the whole idea of the legal system is that we have some way to settle our differences other than knocking each other in the head on a regular basis. And that's really the essence of it. But during the pandemic, because we were considered essential, we were able to remain open. My law office probably has a dozen lawyers and employees, and we had to make the same changes a lot of people did. We had to close the office. We had to have a regular sanitation. We had to limit the visitors by appointment only, figure out ways to deal with special situations. I had one of my best legal secretaries. A legal secretary is special because when I started practicing law, I was introduced to some of the legal secretaries in the large firm I was with, and they said, chat with this one because she knows more about the law than you do, because they're so good and they take care of the business for you. She was not well past retirement age, but she enjoyed working with us. But she had an elderly father, and she went ahead and decided to retire during the pandemic because she was the caregiver for him. And for her to be exposed from coming and going to work and all the people that came in our office probably was a risk to him. So I actually lost one of my best employees in part during the pandemic because of that, needing to go ahead and retire. So our pandemic adjustments were probably smaller than a lot because of the type of business that we had, but we still had to continue and figure out how to do so. Just generally speaking, as a law firm being a small business, before I was with the firm that I'm with now that has about 7 lawyers and about a dozen employees total, I was with a law firm that had 30 lawyers and probably about 60 employees total, and I was part of the management there. It always amazed me when I started rising through the firm to realize how many people we had that dealt with the regulations and the taxes and all the human resources things that we had to deal with. We had 2 full-time people that did, and for 60 folks who did nothing but human resources. And when I say that, I mean taxes, and I mean insurance, and I mean regulations. The law is regulated just like a lot of professions by us, and not by an executive branch agency, but by the Supreme Court of Georgia. And we are required to do all kinds of continuing education classes and reports that we have to turn in on the type of work that we're doing. If you're like me and live in the Augusta area and you practice in 2 states, Georgia and South Carolina, now you have 2 states to contend with. And the requirements of South Carolina for an attorney to keep their license is different than the requirements in some instances for the state of Georgia. And you have to stop and think about, have I met that requirement in Georgia? Do I have to go to that continuing legal education class in South Carolina? South Carolina has a provision whereby, it's a good thing, it's not bad, but they have a different provision whereby you have to go to an addiction, alcohol type awareness, drug awareness, actually suicide prevention. In the area of the legal profession, the suicide rate tends to be higher than it does in many other professions. And you have to go to that class and you have to attend it. You don't have to do that in Georgia. So keeping up with what's going on in one state and the next can be problematic as well. Even now in a smaller law firm that I have with 7 lawyers and like I said, total about a dozen of us, give or take, depending on who's working with us during the summer, law students and whatnot. I think we have 3 folks who keep the books for us. Not all full time, but 2 accountants. The way the law firm is structured is that I myself have an accountant for my professional corporation, which belongs to my law firm, and the law firm has an accountant as well. And then we have someone who comes into the office a couple of days a week, and all they do is keep the books. They do more than just the regulations and the taxes and the retirement programs that we have and stuff like that. They do with checks coming in, checks going out, so forth and so on. But a lot of that time is spent in a small law firm because we don't have a 100% HR person. That falls to the senior partner to deal with the HR issues. Who's unhappy? Who wants to change their hours? Who do we need to hire next? Have we paid the county occupation taxes that are required? The landlord issues. Should we move to a bigger building? If we move to a bigger building, is it zoned correctly for what we want to do? So there's all kind of numerous issues that go on that you have to deal with running a small business. And I feel like half the time from about, not 9 to 5, but maybe from 9 to 11, I'm dealing with HR issues and I'm dealing with regulation issues and I'm dealing with requirements put on the profession by the bureaucracy above us, which is the court system. And then maybe at about 11, I can go to an early lunch and then practice law the rest of the afternoon. And the whole time trying to keep the doors open and everybody getting their paychecks made. So it's a different type of profession than many that belong to, but it has some of the same burdens as far as administrative cost and regulation costs. And probably, actually, if you think about it, depending on how you look at it, it's one of the more heavily regulated professions because of all the requirements that are placed upon attorneys. But nonetheless, it's a profession that I enjoy. And I can say this, we get to travel, as you know, as legislators sometimes to national conventions and coalesce with other legislators around the nation. And I do quite often get to talk to other folks that serve on the judiciary committees, and we talk about the practice of law here and there. Just like Georgia is the #1 place to do business for the traditional business people think about, in the state of Georgia, practicing law is probably better than in many of those other conversations I have with folks from other states, because the regulations, the procedures that we're required to do seem to be less intrusive and less in number here than in many other places that I have been able to compare it to. So that whole theme of Georgia being a great place to do business, although we do have these burdens, many of them from the federal government, unfortunately, it seems, but although we do have these burdens, we have less than the other states around us. And I think it makes us one of the reasons why we're one of the fastest growing states in the nation.
Before we finish, Barry, would you share with us, maybe something about, your business during the pandemic? Did it decline? I know it had to stay because it was an essential. Do you see more business, or the qualified labor, are they coming back looking for jobs? Kind of tell us what you see from this point forward
Yes.
in your practice.
So the law practice can be varied. The two big areas are criminal and civil. Actually, most lawyers don't do criminal law. You hear a lot more about it because it's the stories that make the news, the murders and all the terrible things that can happen. But civil law is, criminal law is about this much. Civil law is about this much, dealing with businesses, dealing with people, with disputes with one another. We do both in my law firm. Some lawyers specialize in one side of it. Some lawyers specialize in the other side. Some do both. We have a varied practice, and we saw parts of our practice slow down during the pandemic, but other parts pick up some. And so it was very interesting. The needs of the people we served changed in volume in different areas that we served. For example, the lawyers that do divorce work and criminal work, there was a little slowdown for a while. But some of the other lawyers that do civil work, there was a pickup in some of the stuff that they do. So it was kind of interesting. Overall, it was a small dip for us for a while, but it evened out after a while, and now we're seeing that come back to more normal levels we had beforehand, if that makes sense.
Super. Fleming, thank you. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much for sharing your story with us. I greatly appreciate it.
Happy to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Super. And I appreciate all the presenters today. Thank you very much for coming. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.